me here, Mom!
If you wait for the storm to pass, all you'll find is a body. This is no longer a family matter. From now on, you'll speak to my lawyer.
There's an old saying that blood is thicker than water. That family is the last safe harbor when the rest of the world turns its back on you. I used to believe that, naively, right up until the day that belief almost got my daughter killed. Imagine this. Really close your eyes and picture it. You are standing in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness, where the temperature is -60 degrees and the wind screams like death itself. Around you is nothing but an endless, blinding white, and the only silence comes when the wind stops to take a breath. And then, in that flesh-freezing cold, you find your 16-year-old daughter, huddled in a makeshift wooden cabin, her lips already the chilling purple of a life fading away. Her breath forms weak, white clouds of fog. And when she looks up at you with exhausted eyes, she doesn't cry. She only whispers a single sentence, a sentence that shattered my world and built an entirely new person from the ashes. She said, "They left me here, Mom. They were not strangers. They were my brother David, the family's golden child. They were my sister-in-law Karen, who always looked at me with eyes full of pity. They were the two cousins my daughter Chloe had tried so desperately to befriend. And most terrifying of all, they included the silent complicity of my own parents, who stood by and watched their prank unfold. A prank that involved abandoning a minor in the middle of an oncoming blizzard, dozens of miles from the safety of the resort, with no means of communication and no way back. In my career, I've told hundreds of stories about conflicts, dramas, and mistakes. But this isn't a story about a mistake. This is a story about a choice. A deliberate choice meant to teach the single mother's weak daughter a lesson. And yes, they succeeded. They taught me a lesson. They taught me that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from a distant enemy, but from the very people who sit with you at the dinner table. They taught me that boundaries aren't suggestions. They are firewalls to be built of steel and concrete. And they taught me that the moment a mother realizes her child is in danger, she is no longer a gentle black sheep. She becomes a wolf. The story I am about to tell you is not just about the journey to rescue my daughter from a snowstorm. It is the detailed step-by-step blueprint of how I rescued us both from a toxic family. This is a masterclass in turning pain into power, tears into strategy, and an act of betrayal into a payback calculated down to the last detail. They thought they abandoned my daughter in the storm. They didn't know that they had left me with a fire. And that fire was about to burn every bridge, every legacy, and the very reputation they had spent a lifetime building. If you have ever felt dismissed, underestimated, or hurt by the ones who are supposed to love you, then stay. Because you're going to want to hear how this story ends. And that story begins, not in Alaska, but years earlier, with a broken promise. The promise of what a family was supposed to be. Things really fractured 5 years ago, the day my then-husband announced he was leaving me and our 11-year-old daughter for his 23-year-old assistant. The divorce was a bitter, painful mess. As I was trying to piece our lives back together, I naively believed my family would be my shield. I was wrong. My family's reaction said it all. My brother David, always the golden child in our parents' eyes, sat me down not to comfort me, but to logically analyze how I had probably focused too much on my nursing career, how I must have driven him away, somehow. My sister-in-law, Karen, was more subtle. At family gatherings, she'd make snide remarks about how career women often neglect their marriages. Their words were like poisoned needles, drawing no blood but sinking deep into my skin. The contrast between my life and David's was night and day. He was a successful businessman living in a large house in the suburbs, a 15-minute drive from our parents. I was a single mother, an ER nurse working long, stressful shifts, living in a small house in a modest neighborhood. But it was near a good school for Chloe. When David was promoted to regional manager, my parents threw a huge party with dozens of guests. When I, after countless sleepless nights of working and parenting, was made head nurse of the entire ER department, all I got was a text message. "Congrats! Keep it up." That invisible wall grew higher every day. I maintained contact, sent the birthday cards, and swallowed my pride every holiday for one single reason: Chloe. She deserved to know her family. Chloe, my daughter, is a sweet and sensitive soul. She loves art, shoots on old film cameras, and draws the world through her own unique lens. She saw her cousins Jake and Ashley through their glamorous social media posts, ski trips, vibrant parties, and she longed to be a part of that world. She tried desperately to win her grandparents' approval, to connect with her cousins who were close to her in age. But all she ever received was indifference and condescending looks. And then, the invitation to Alaska arrived. It came as a group text from my mother, Barbara, announcing the plans for her and my father's 50th wedding anniversary. "We've decided to take the whole family on a 2-week vacation to a ski resort in Alaska. No excuses. We want everyone there." My heart sank. A 2-week vacation, trapped with judgment and comparison? I called her immediately. I made excuses about work, about my shifts, about a photography camp Chloe had. But my mother dismissed them all with the weapon she wielded most skillfully: emotional manipulation. She sighed over the phone. "So your career is more important than your father's anniversary? Chloe can take pictures anywhere. This is about family, Sarah. Or do you want her to miss the chance to make memories with her grandparents while we're still healthy enough to travel?" That blow landed. But the final one came from Chloe. When I told her about the trip, her eyes lit up. She grabbed my hand, her voice full of excitement. "A real vacation with everyone, Mom? Please, can we go? I've never even been out of state." How could I say no to that look in her eyes? How could I extinguish her small flame of hope for a real family? I caved. I requested the time off, canceled Chloe's camp, and began packing for a trip that my gut told me would be anything but peaceful. I didn't know then that my gut was understating what was to come. I was prepared for uncomfortable comments and condescending looks, but I wasn't prepared for a blizzard. And I certainly wasn't prepared for a betrayal that could be fatal. The flight to Anchorage and the subsequent shuttle ride to the high mountain resort passed in a tense silence. The beauty of Alaska was truly breathtaking. Snow-covered mountains rose majestically to touch a crystal-clear blue sky, and the air was so thin and crisp, so clean it almost hurt to breathe. The resort was a masterpiece of timber and stone, cozy and luxurious, an oasis of comfort in the middle of the wilderness. But not even the grandeur of nature could soothe the sense of unease coiling in my gut. The warning signs, the red flags as they say, appeared within the first hour. As we were checking in, I opened my luggage and took out a professional first aid kit, some energy bars, survival blankets, and 2 GPS locators. With my experience as an ER nurse, I knew the potential dangers of a place this remote. My family's reaction? A symphony of ridicule. "Jesus, Sarah." My sister-in-law Karen rolled her eyes. "We're at a 5-star resort, not on one of those survival shows on TV." My brother David just smirked. "That's my sister for you. Prepping for the apocalypse even on vacation." My nephew and niece, Jake and Ashley, burst out laughing. "I bet Aunt Sarah brought signal flares too," Jake said, and Ashley called me Safety Sarah for the rest of the evening. I just stayed silent, handed one of the GPS units to Chloe and told her to keep it in her jacket pocket at all times. She reluctantly agreed, her face flushed with embarrassment from her cousin's teasing. The first red flag went from orange to crimson the next day, on the ski slopes. David, as the most experienced one, led the group. I warned him that Chloe had only been skiing a few times and should stay on the beginner slopes. "Don't coddle her, Sarah." David brushed it off. "A little challenge will do her good." And that challenge came when Jake, in an effort to show off, deliberately veered off the marked trail and into a steeper, more wooded area. Chloe, trying to keep up, lost control and tumbled, rolling several times before stopping in a deep snowbank. My heart stopped. I rushed down to her, but it was the others' reaction that left me cold. No one showed any concern. David just laughed and yelled from above, "See, a little fall never hurt anyone." Karen remarked that Chloe was probably just not very athletic. They treated my daughter's safety like a joke, a minor inconvenience in their day of fun. That evening, the assault turned from physical to psychological. I saw Jake and Ashley sitting with Chloe by the grand fireplace in the main lodge. They weren't mocking her anymore. Instead, they were using a far more dangerous tactic: conditional approval. "We know a real Alaskan challenge," Jake said, his voice full of mystery. "A snowmobile race to an old warming hut to the east, where the regular tourists never go. Now that is a real adventure," Ashley added, her voice sickly sweet. "If you do that, Chloe, you'll prove to everyone you're not a little kid anymore. Even Grandpa Richard will be impressed. Your mom shelters you too much, but this is your chance to show who you really are." They had planted the seed in the most fertile ground, the insecurity and desperate need for validation of a 16-year-old girl. I felt the shift in Chloe's attitude. She started avoiding my gaze, and when I tried to talk about the dangers, she would only reply with lines she had learned from her cousins. "You always think the worst, Mom?" Or, "I want to have my own memories, too." The night before that fateful day, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. I knew something was wrong. I rechecked the GPS unit, making sure the battery was full. I reminded Chloe about the mini satellite phone I'd put in her pack, telling her to call immediately if anything happened. She nodded impatiently, her eyes still shining with excitement for tomorrow's adventure. When I saw the conspiratorial smile Jake and Ashley shared when they thought no one was looking, a chill ran down my spine. I had a choice: be the tyrant, the controlling mother my family always painted me as, and risk pushing my daughter further away, or trust her and hope that my instincts were wrong. I chose to trust. And it was the biggest mistake of my life, a mistake that nearly cost me the most precious thing I have. The morning of that fateful day began with a perfect deception by nature. The sky was painfully blue, without a single cloud. The sun cast weak but glittering rays on the snow, turning the whole landscape into a giant Christmas card. It was that peaceful beauty that lulled my instincts to sleep and pushed Chloe straight into the arms of wolves in sheep's clothing. Jake and Ashley were uncharacteristically friendly. They complimented Chloe's snowsuit, talked about how they were going to take epic pictures. In that moment, Chloe truly believed she had been accepted. The smile on her face was real, and the joy in her eyes was real. Before they left, I pulled Chloe aside, checking her helmet one last time. "I have a bad feeling about this, Chloe. Promise me you'll be careful." Eager to go, she just nodded quickly. "I know, Mom. It's just a fun race." Then she turned, climbed onto her snowmobile, and disappeared into her cousin's laughter. It was the last time I saw her smile that day. The race began. 3 snowmobiles shot off like arrows across the white expanse. I stood there watching, a cold sense of helplessness washing over my chest. From what Chloe told me later, the first 45 minutes were genuinely fun. She felt free, powerful, and part of something. Jake and Ashley kept looking back, signaling and laughing with her. They went deeper, further into the wilderness, where the tracks of other tourists disappeared. And then, it happened. Chloe's snowmobile started making sputtering coughs. It jerked a few times, then slowly coasted to a stop and died in the middle of a vast, silent snow valley. Jake and Ashley circled back, their faces masks of perfect surprise. Jake, playing the part of the savvy older guy, hopped off his machine, opened the engine cover, and pretended to fiddle around for a moment. After a few minutes, he stood up, dusted off his hands, and announced with certainty, "Damn, the spark plug's shot. Too bad I didn't bring a spare." They were miles from the resort, and the warming hut they'd mentioned was just ahead, only a few hundred yards away. "Here's the plan," Ashley suggested, her voice dripping with concern. "We'll get you settled in that hut. It's out of the wind. Then we'll go full speed back to the resort, get tools and the rescue crew, and come right back. It'll be quick, an hour or two at most." Chloe, still completely trusting, agreed. They led her to the small, old wooden hut. Before leaving, Ashley held out her hand. "There's no signal out here anyway. Give me the sat phone so we can call rescue the second we're out of this dead zone. It'll be faster." That was the final move. The final knife into my daughter's innocence. Chloe, without a hint of suspicion, handed Ashley the mini satellite phone, her only lifeline to the outside world. She watched her two cousins climb onto their machines, wave, and yell, "See you later." They hit the gas, and their figures grew smaller and smaller before disappearing over a snowy hill. A heavy silence fell. For the first hour, Chloe wasn't worried. She explored the hut, took out her camera to get a few shots, and waited. 1 hour turned into 2. The sun began to sink behind the mountain peaks, taking its meager warmth with it. The cold started to seep through her layers of clothing. The sky, once blue, was shifting to a leaden gray. The wind began to howl. She started to feel uneasy. 2 hours had passed. They should have been back by now. She opened her backpack, habitually reaching for her phone. Empty. And that's when the memory hit her. She had given it to Ashley. The truth hit her like a slab of ice. They weren't coming back. They had taken her only means of contact. They had left her here, alone. She burst out of the hut, screaming into the void, but her screams were swallowed by the rising wind. Around her was only snow and indifferent mountains. And then, the first snowflake fell, then a second, then hundreds, thousands, began to pour from the sky, thick and fast, erasing everything. The storm had arrived, and my daughter was in the very heart of it, facing the fury of Alaska alone, with a broken heart and a body that was rapidly losing its warmth. At the resort, I stood by the large window of the main lodge, staring out. The peaceful natural painting of the morning had vanished, replaced by a consuming grayness that was swallowing everything. The wind began to howl in gusts, and the snow was falling thicker by the minute. 3 hours had passed. A mother's instinct. It's a cold feeling that has nothing to do with the outside temperature. It's an internal alarm, and it was screaming inside my head. And then, I saw them. 2 snowmobiles emerging from the swirling snow. Only 2. Jake and Ashley. No Chloe. They burst into the lodge, covered in snow, their faces flushed. Ashley ran to me, her voice laced with fake panic. "Aunt Sarah, thank God you're here. Chloe's snowmobile broke down," Jake added, panting as if he'd just run a long way. "We told her to wait in the warming hut nearby. We came right back to get help. I'm sure she's fine." I looked directly into their eyes. Their concern was a performance. Their story was too smooth. "Where, exactly?" I asked, my voice flat and emotionless. "Out east, near the ridge?" Jake stammered. "Why didn't you use your radios to call me immediately?" We were too panicked. We forgot," Ashley replied. avoiding my gaze. A lie. I didn't need anything more. I pulled out my phone, my hand trembling but my mind razor sharp. I opened the locator app. A small blue dot, blinking, motionless. I zoomed in. 10 miles. 10 miles east, far from any official trail. Then I opened the weather app. A severe blizzard warning had just been issued. The wind chill was dropping to -85 degrees Fahrenheit. The pieces clicked together in my head, forming a horrific picture. This wasn't an accident, it was a plan. They had left her there. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The shock and fear were instantly replaced by something else. The cold fury of an ER nurse. I knew I was out of time. I ran to the front desk, to the resort's security team. "My daughter, 16 years old, is stranded out there," I said, pointing to the location on my phone. "We need to go now." The head of security, a large man with a thick beard, looked out the window and shook his head. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but in a blizzard like this, our protocol is to wait for it to pass. It's too dangerous to send a team out now." And that's when the mother my family knew vanished. In her place stood head nurse Sarah, who faced life-or-death situations every night. I put my phone down on the counter. My voice had no tremor, only the hard edge of steel. "Listen to me very carefully. My 16-year-old daughter is out there in sub-zero temperatures. Hypothermia will set in less than an hour. Loss of consciousness will follow shortly after. If you wait for the storm to pass, you will be recovering a body. That won't be an accident. It will be your negligence. And I, as her legal guardian, will sue this resort into bankruptcy. I want a rescue team and a professional-grade snowmobile. Now. And I'm going with them." The look in his eyes changed. He saw the determination, the professional knowledge, and the very real threat in my gaze. 5 minutes later, I was on a rescue snowmobile, sitting next to 2 security officers, charging into the heart of the storm. That ride was hell on earth. The wind roared. The headlights struggled to pierce the whiteout conditions. My entire mind was a loop. Medical procedures for treating hypothermia, prayers, and a burning hatred for my own family. Finally, we saw it. A small black dot in the endless white. The hut. I jumped off the machine before it even stopped, wading through knee-deep snow and throwing the door open. And I saw her. My Chloe, huddled in a corner, wrapped in her thin jacket, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. Her skin was waxy white, her lips purple. I rushed to her, fell to my knees and wrapped my arms around her, trying to give her my warmth. She looked up with exhausted eyes, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition. She knew me. And then she whispered that sentence, the one that confirmed everything. "They left me here, Mom." I held my daughter tight, feeling the faint spark of her life. The blizzard outside was still raging, but it was nothing compared to the storm of fury that had just formed inside of me. They had made a fatal mistake. They thought they were just prodding a sheep, but they didn't realize they had just woken a sleeping mama bear, and when this storm cleared, I would be the one hunting. The moment I held Chloe in my arms, my entire being switched into ER nurse mode. There was no room for panic or tears, only action. I issued orders to the rescue team in a terrifyingly calm voice. "Thermal blankets now. We need to get these wet outer layers off her. Check circulation in her extremities. We need to raise her core temperature slowly." The 2 security officers, already impressed by my earlier decisiveness, now followed my orders without question. They worked with professional efficiency. On the rescue snowmobile back to the resort, I kept talking to Chloe, refusing to let her slip away. I asked her simple questions. "What's your name? Do you know who I am?" Each weak reply was a small victory, a flicker of hope in the middle of the blizzard and the storm in my heart. My mind was a cold checklist. prevent further heat loss, monitor respirations, prepare for the risk of cardiac arrhythmia as her body rewarmed. But beneath that professional shell, a volcano of rage was building, ready to erupt. When we arrived at the main lodge, a scene was already set. David, Karen, and my parents, Richard and Barbara, were waiting. They rushed toward us, their faces arranged in masks of perfect rehearsed concern. "Oh my God, Chloe, is she okay?" Karen cried out, her hand flying to her mouth. "Thank God you found her. We were worried sick," David said, trying to place a hand on my shoulder. I acted as if they didn't exist. I walked past them as if they were air. My eyes were focused only on Chloe and the resort's medical team that was waiting. "I need a doctor, immediately," I told the manager, "and prepare for a medical helicopter transport to Anchorage as soon as the weather clears." My complete dismissal, that absolute coldness, was the first shot in this war. They were stunned for a moment, their worried family act completely shattered. After Chloe was under a doctor's care, stable in her room, and sleeping fitfully under medication, they found me. I was standing in a quiet hallway, looking out the window where the storm had begun to subside. They cornered me, and Act 2 began. The theater of denial and blame. "Sarah, what are you doing?" David started, his voice dripping with offense. "We came back immediately to get help. This was just an unfortunate accident with the weather." "That's right," Karen chimed in, her voice sycophantic. "Maybe Chloe panicked unnecessarily. She's always been a bit fragile. She should have stayed in the hut." My father, Richard, crossed his arms, using that patriarchal tone I knew so well. "All right, what's done is done. The important thing is, she's safe. We shouldn't make a big deal out of this. It'll ruin your mother's and my anniversary trip." And my mother, Barbara, the eternal peacemaker, put a hand on my arm. "Sarah, I know you're upset, but your brother and his family didn't mean any harm. We're family. Just let it go." I listened to it all in silence. I let them spin their lies, their selfish excuses, their attempts to normalize an act that nearly killed their own niece, their own granddaughter. I looked at each of their faces, David's smugness, Karen's malice, my father's entitlement, and my mother's toxic weakness. When they had finished, I slowly pulled my phone from my pocket. I had hit record the moment they approached me. I pressed stop. Then I looked up, directly into David's eyes. My voice was even, without a ripple. "This was not an accident," I said. "An accident is when a snowmobile actually breaks down. An accident does not include taking her satellite phone. That is proof of intent. You lied about going back for help. You abandoned her to face a storm you were warned about. And now you're standing here, trying to convince me that I'm the one with the problem." I paused for a second, letting my words sink into the tense silence. Our conversation as a family is over. I put the phone back in my pocket. "From now on, you will not speak to me." I glanced at all four of them, their expressions shifting from confidence to confusion, then to a flicker of fear. "You will speak to my lawyer." My last words hung in the resort hallway like a death sentence. "You will speak to my lawyer." For a moment, none of them could process it. The confusion on their faces quickly curdled into indignant rage. My father, Richard, was the first to speak, his voice cracking. "Are you insane, Sarah? You're threatening your own family with a lawyer?" My brother David took a step forward, pointing a finger at my face. "You can't do this. This is a private family matter." I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I just gave them one last look, my gaze as cold as the Alaskan winter itself. Then I turned my back and walked away, leaving them standing there with their meaningless accusations. That act of turning my back was more powerful than any word. It declared that to me, they no longer existed. The last 2 days of the vacation were a cold war. We would pass each other in the dining hall and they would fall silent. They tried to approach me in the lodge, but I created my own space with silence and a vacant stare. They were no longer a family on vacation. They had become defendants in a trial where I was the judge, jury, and executioner. That night, after making sure Chloe was fast asleep, safe and warm, I began to act. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a cold, starlit sky, but the storm inside of me was just beginning. Step 1. The lawyer. I researched and called one of the top personal injury and civil liability law firms in Anchorage. I didn't present myself as a crying victim. I presented myself as a nurse reporting a case. I sent them everything. The GPS data showing the time and location where Chloe was abandoned, the initial medical report from the resort's doctor documenting her hypothermia, and most importantly, the audio recording of the family's gaslighting performance. I told the lawyer, Mr. Harrison, I'm not suing for money, I'm suing for public accountability. Step 2. The finances. The next call was to my financial advisor in Seattle. Years ago, when David's tech company was just an idea, I had invested a significant amount of money, becoming a founding shareholder. I asked my advisor about the buyout clause in our partnership agreement. As I remembered, there was a provision that allowed one partner to demand a full buyout of their shares. This would force David to raise a massive amount of capital in a short time to buy my stake, or face selling the company or finding new investors, exposing all of his financial books in the process. This attack wasn't aimed at the family. It was aimed directly at the Golden Child's empire. Step 3. The public humiliation. This was the blow I saved just for David. I knew he had just been nominated for chairman of our city's Chamber of Commerce, a position he coveted for its prestige and power. Through Mr. Harrison, we drafted a formal and completely anonymous letter to the Chamber's Ethics Committee. The letter accused no one. It merely expressed deep concern that a leading candidate, a Mr. David Kwanzaa, was currently the subject of an Alaska State Police investigation regarding the willful endangerment of a minor. The letter politely suggested that the board might want to postpone the vote until the investigation was concluded. It was a legally perfect move, not slander, but a notification of a verifiable fact. That news reached David via an urgent phone call while we were waiting for our flight home at the Anchorage airport. I didn't need to hear what he was saying. I just needed to see his face turn from pale to a furious red as he glared at me from across the waiting area. His phone came out, and a barrage of profanity-laced, threatening text messages began to flood my phone. I didn't reply. I just quietly opened the airline's app, and with the money I had saved, upgraded my and Chloe's tickets to first class. It was a small act, but deeply symbolic. On the flight home, we would not be sitting together, literally or figuratively. The war had just begun, but I had already secured my victory. The flight from Anchorage to Seattle was the longest of my life, not because of the hours, but because of the heavy silence that separated the two cabins. In first class, Chloe and I sat in a quiet space, her head resting on my shoulder as she slept for nearly the entire way. The safety and warmth had allowed her body and mind to rest. Meanwhile, in economy, I could imagine the real storm was raging. My brother, David, was surely making frantic calls, trying to stamp out the fire that was beginning to incinerate his reputation. My parents were likely caught between anger and confusion, unable to understand why the family's black sheep had finally dared to show her teeth. When we landed, the separation continued. While they waited for their pre-booked family van, Chloe and I quietly followed a close friend who was waiting to pick us up. The look in David's eyes as he watched me leave was no longer one of contempt, but of hatred mixed with a little fear. He knew I wasn't bluffing anymore. The following week was one of intentional silence. I muted notifications from all family members. My phone stopped vibrating with missed calls and angry texts. Instead, I dedicated all my time to Chloe. We started our first therapy sessions. The therapist said that Chloe's trauma wasn't just from the cold or the fear of abandonment, but from the collapse of trust in the very people who were supposed to protect her. The healing would be a long road, and I knew the first step on that path was to force the people who caused the wound to take full responsibility. A week later, my family received an email from Mr. Harrison's law firm. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons for a mandatory mediation meeting at his office downtown. They came. All of them. They looked tired and haggard. The smugness was gone, replaced by sullen, defensive expressions. We weren't meeting in my living room, but in a large conference room with a long, cold wooden table. Chloe and I sat on one side with Mr. Harrison. They sat on the other. Mr. Harrison, without any social pleasantries, got straight to the point. He systematically presented each piece of evidence: the GPS data, the weather report, the rescue team's report, the medical records, and finally, he played the audio recording of their conversation in the hotel hallway. Their own voices, full of lies and denials, echoed hauntingly in the silent room. Karen stared at the table. My father clenched his fists. Then, Mr. Harrison laid out the terms. They were not for negotiation. They were for acceptance. First, a public letter of apology, with the text approved by my lawyer, to be published on the front page of the local newspaper. The letter had to admit to the act of willful endangerment and the subsequent dishonesty. Second, the establishment of a lifetime therapy trust fund for Chloe, paid for entirely by David and my parents, to ensure she would have the best possible psychological support for years to come. Third, the official legal execution of my share buyout from David's company. He had 90 days to raise the capital and complete the transaction at market value, or we reserve the right to force a public auction of the shares. And finally, a legal agreement of no direct contact with Chloe. Any desire for visits or communication had to go through me and be approved by her therapist. When Mr. Harrison finished, the room was silent. Their dream had crumbled. David was no longer the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. His company was facing a crisis, and their image of a perfect family was about to be stripped bare before the entire community. Finally, I turned to Chloe, who had been silent throughout the meeting, and asked, "Is there anything you want to say?" She took a deep breath. For the first time, I saw my daughter look directly at her grandparents and her cousins without a trace of fear. Her voice wasn't trembling. It was clear and steady. "I've been thinking a lot," she began. "And the scariest part wasn't the cold. It wasn't even that I could have died. The scariest part was, when I was sitting alone in that hut, I realized that to you, I didn't matter. I was just a joke. Something disposable for your entertainment. You didn't just abandon me in a snowstorm. You abandoned me a long, long time ago." She paused, looking each of them in the eye. "I don't hate you. I just don't know who you are anymore." That sentence, sharper than any accusation, was the end of everything. Months later, our lives found a new kind of peace. The apology was published. David somehow managed the money to buy out my shares, and we were completely financially independent. The boundaries I set were respected, not out of love, but out of fear of further legal consequences. Sometimes I think about the two definitions of family: the family you are born into, and the family you choose. Sometimes the most radical act of love isn't holding on, but having the courage to let go of toxic relationships, even when they share your blood. Building boundaries isn't about walling others out. It's about protecting the peace and safety within. Our journey is a reminder that after the most devastating storm, if you are strong enough to stand, you will see a sky clearer than ever before. And you will realize you are the architect of your own peace.